Why did animation in the 80s sometimes feel more dangerous than live-action fantasy? Beneath the bright Saturday morning cartoons, toy ads, and cheerful heroes, another kind of animated world was hiding in plain sight. These films had dying magic, undead armies, cursed kingdoms, lonely warriors, and monsters that did not feel made for children. They were strange, beautiful, frightening, and often misunderstood. And once you see them, the 80s never look innocent again. Number 10. The Secret of Nim, 1982. At first glance, The Secret of Nim looks like a gentle animal adventure about a widowed field mouse trying to save her sick child. But the deeper the story goes, the more it starts to feel like a dark fantasy nightmare wearing the skin of a children's film. This is not a soft cartoon world where danger is harmless and every shadow has a friendly face. This world has death, disease, laboratories, unnatural intelligence, and a mysterious society of rats living with knowledge they were never meant to have. What makes the film so powerful is the contrast between its small heroine and the enormous forces around her. Mrs. Brisby is not a warrior, a princess, or a chosen hero. She is a mother, terrified but determined, stepping into a hidden world of secrets because her family has no other chance. That emotional fear makes the fantasy feel real. The animation has a glowing, almost magical darkness, especially in the scenes involving Nicodemus and the amulet. There is beauty here, but it is never completely safe. The Secret of Nim remains unforgettable because it treats childhood fear seriously. It understands that the scariest monsters are not always villains. Sometimes they are illness, helplessness, and the unknown. Number 9. The Last Unicorn, 1982. The Last Unicorn is one of those animated films that looks delicate from a distance, then quietly breaks your heart when you actually step inside it. Its colors are soft, its fantasy world is dreamlike, and its title sounds almost innocent. But beneath the beauty is a story about loss, loneliness, immortality, and the terrible cost of becoming human. The film follows a unicorn who discovers she may be the last of her kind. That simple idea gives the entire movie a mournful power. She is not chasing glory or adventure. She is searching for proof that she is not alone in the universe. Along the way, she meets strange companions, false magicians, cursed creatures, and a king whose obsession has trapped beauty itself. What gives the film its dark fantasy edge is the feeling that magic is fading. The world still has wonders, but many of them are tired, broken, or imprisoned. Even the Red Bull, one of the film's most haunting images, feels less like a normal monster and more like a force of ancient terror. Unlike many animated adventures, The Last Unicorn does not offer simple comfort. It understands that beauty can be painful, that memory can become a wound, and that some transformations cannot be undone. Number 8. Angel's Egg, 1985. Some films explain their worlds. Angel's Egg refuses to. It drops the viewer into a silent, ruined landscape and lets the mystery slowly crawl under the skin. Directed by Mamoru Oshii, this is not traditional fantasy adventure. It is gothic, symbolic, quiet, and almost hypnotic, the kind of animated film that feels less like a story being told and more like a dream you were not supposed to remember. The film follows a young girl carrying a mysterious egg through a shadowy, abandoned world. She meets a strange man with a weapon shaped like a cross, and together they move through empty streets, fossil-like structures, and images that seem connected to faith, extinction, and forgotten history. But the film never gives easy answers. That is exactly why it feels so haunting. Instead of battles and monsters, Angel's Egg uses silence, emptiness, and atmosphere. Every frame feels loaded with meaning, but the meaning keeps slipping away. The darkness here is not loud. It is spiritual. It is the fear of a world after belief has collapsed. For viewers expecting normal fantasy, this film can feel confusing. But for those who accept its rhythm, Angel's Egg becomes one of the strangest and most unforgettable animated visions of the 80s. Number 7. Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, 1984. Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind is often remembered as a beautiful environmental adventure, but its world is far darker than that description suggests. This is a poisoned future where humanity lives in the ruins of its own mistakes. Toxic forests spread across the land, giant insects move like ancient guardians, and surviving kingdoms fight over weapons they barely understand. It may have wonder, but it is built on apocalypse. Nausicaa herself is not powerful because she is violent. She is powerful because she listens to what everyone else fears. Where soldiers see monsters, she sees a wounded ecosystem. Where rulers see weapons, she sees another disaster waiting to happen. That moral clarity gives the film its emotional force, because the world around her is constantly choosing fear over understanding. The dark fantasy feeling comes from the scale of the danger. The insects are not simple beasts. The forest is not simple evil. Everything is connected, and every act of violence risks awakening something much bigger than human politics. This is why the film still feels massive. Nausicaa is not just about survival, it is about whether humanity deserves another chance after destroying its own world. That question gives the film a haunting weight that many fantasy epics never reach. Number 6. The Flight of Dragons, 1982. The Flight of Dragons may look like a traditional fantasy quest, but underneath its dragons, wizards, and enchanted kingdoms is a surprisingly sad idea. Magic is losing the war against the modern world. That makes the film more than a simple adventure. It becomes a story about imagination trying to survive in an age that no longer believes in it. The plot follows a modern board game designer who is pulled into a magical realm where mythical creatures face extinction because science, logic, and technology are rising. Instead of making dragons purely mysterious, the film tries to explain how they might work biologically, how they fly, why they breathe fire, and how fantasy might exist under its own rules. That mix of myth and science gives the film a very unusual identity. But the emotional darkness comes from the feeling of disappearance. The magical world is not just threatened by one evil warlock, it is threatened by time itself. The creatures of legend are being pushed out of existence, not because they are weak, but because mankind is changing. That is what makes The Flight of Dragons quietly powerful. It is not only asking whether the heroes can defeat darkness, it is asking whether wonder can survive once the world decides it has outgrown it. Number 5. Kandahar, 1987. Kandahar feels like a beautiful dream infected by something metallic and cold. Directed by René Laloux, this French-Belgian animated film does not have the familiar shape of a typical fantasy adventure. Its world is strange, colorful, peaceful, and almost too perfect until an army of lifeless metal soldiers begins destroying everything with terrifying calm. The story follows Sylvain, a young warrior sent to investigate the attacks. At first, the threat seems external, mysterious metal men invading a utopian society. But the deeper Sylvain travels, the stranger the truth becomes. The danger is tied to time, consequence, and the future mistakes of Kandahar itself. That twist gives the film a deeper darkness than a normal invasion story. The enemy is not just coming from outside, it may be born from the civilization's own destiny. Visually, Kandahar is unforgettable. Its landscapes feel organic, alien, and surreal, almost like paintings that have learned to breathe. The fantasy is not built from castles and dragons, but from mutated nature, strange creatures, and impossible architecture. What makes it so haunting is the quiet warning underneath the beauty. A perfect world can still carry the seed of its own destruction, and sometimes the future does not arrive as progress. Sometimes it marches back as punishment. Number 4. Heavy Metal, 1981. Heavy metal was not made to comfort anyone. It was loud, strange, violent, surreal, and proudly adult in a decade when many viewers still thought animation belonged mostly to children. Based on the famous magazine, the film became an anthology of dark sci-fi and fantasy stories connected by the Lochnar, a glowing green orb that spreads corruption wherever it appears. That structure gives the film its wild, unpredictable energy. One moment it feels like cosmic horror. The next, it becomes sword-and-sorcery, dystopian fantasy, space adventure, or a nightmare pulled from a painted album cover. It does not move with the clean discipline of a traditional story. It hits like a fever dream. What makes Heavy Metal important is its attitude. It showed animation could be messy, dangerous, stylish, and completely uninterested in being respectable. The film has rough edges, but those rough edges are part of its identity. It feels like a secret door opening into everything mainstream animation was not allowed to be. The darkness here is not subtle. It is excessive, chaotic, and sometimes overwhelming. But that is also why the film became a cult object. Heavy Metal captured a moment when animation was willing to break rules, chase nightmares, and turn fantasy into something electric, dangerous, and forbidden. Number 3. The Black Cauldron, 1985. For Disney, The Black Cauldron was not just another fantasy film. It was a step into territory the studio had rarely dared to explore so openly. Instead of warmth, songs, and comforting magic, this film offered a grim world of haunted castles, grotesque creatures, undead warriors, and one of Disney's most frightening villains, the Horned King. The story follows a young assistant pigkeeper named Taran, who becomes part of a desperate quest to stop the Horned King from using a magical cauldron to raise an army of the dead. That premise alone feels darker than most Disney adventures. But what really gives the movie its reputation is the atmosphere. The world of Prydain feels damp, shadowy, and dangerous. Even the comic relief cannot fully erase the sense that something rotten is waiting underneath the fantasy. The Horned King is the film's unforgettable nightmare. He does not feel like a charming villain with jokes and style. He feels skeletal, ancient, and cold, almost like death wearing a crown. The film struggled because it did not fit the Disney image people expected, but that same problem made it fascinating. The Black Cauldron remains one of the studio's strangest animated risks. Too dark for some children, too atmospheric to ignore, and too unusual to disappear. Number 2. Vampire Hunter D, 1985. Vampire Hunter D feels like Gothic horror wandered into a ruined future and decided to stay there. Based on the Japanese light novels, the film takes place in a post-apocalyptic frontier where ancient vampire nobles, mutant creatures, and broken technology exist side by side. It is not just dark fantasy, it is dark fantasy after civilization has already collapsed. The story follows D, a mysterious dhampir, half human, half vampire, who is hired to protect a young woman from a powerful vampire lord. But D is not a bright, heroic savior. He is quiet, elegant, deadly, and emotionally distant, like someone who has survived too much to believe in simple victories. That loneliness gives the film much of its power. The world around him feels cursed. Castles rise over wastelands. Monsters appear like remnants of old nightmares. Science and superstition blur until the viewer cannot tell where one ends and the other begins. This mixture of Gothic imagery and futuristic ruin makes the film feel unique even decades later. What makes Vampire Hunter D so memorable is its mood. It is violent, stylish, eerie, and deeply lonely. The real question is not just whether D can defeat the monster, it is whether someone who is part monster himself can ever truly belong anywhere. Number 1. Fire and Ice, 1983. If 80s dark fantasy animation had a war cry, Fire and Ice might be it. Directed by Ralph Bakshi and shaped by the visual imagination of legendary fantasy artist Frank Frazetta, the film brought sword and sorcery animation to the screen with raw physical power. This was not polished fairy tale fantasy. It was muscle, stone, flame, ice, violence, and survival. The story is simple in the way old myths are simple. A ruthless ice lord named Necron threatens to freeze the world, while a young warrior and a displaced princess become part of the fight against him. But the film's real force is not the plot, it is the feeling. Through rotoscoping, the bodies move with a weight and realism that makes every chase, attack, and fall feel brutal. The world does not feel safe for a second. What separates Fire and Ice from cleaner fantasy animation is its savage visual identity. The landscapes look hostile, the villains feel primitive and cruel, the heroes survive by instinct as much as courage. Frazetta's influence gives the film the energy of a fantasy painting dragged into motion and thrown into battle. It may not be perfect, but it is unforgettable. Fire and Ice represents the 80s at their most mythic and dangerous. Animation refusing to be cute, soft, or safe. The 80s did not only give us bright cartoons and toy-selling heroes. It gave us animated worlds where magic was dying, kingdoms were cursed, and heroes walked through nightmares instead of fairy tales. These films were strange, risky, and sometimes misunderstood. but that is exactly why they still matter. They proved animation was never just for children. Sometimes, it was where the darkest dreams survived.